Hello, welcome back
Hello.
to our Artist Talk series. I'm so excited to be talking with you today, Freddie Bell. Um, Freddie is one of our regional emerging artists in residence here at Artspace and has been in the building since January and will be here through the end of this year. So we've already sort of crossed that halfway point, which is always kind of exciting and starts the bittersweet feeling of things
Yeah.
winding down. But Freddie, I'm going to start this conversation with something that I used to do previously in this series, which is trying to kind of give my own interpretation of your work for our audience, and then letting you kind of push back or expand on some of the things I bring up. Um, so yeah, I've got the need to speak and hear my own thoughts. I find it very amusing. So entertain me for a moment. And folks can see examples of your work in the background, which helps. But I know when you joined us at Artspace, your work had a very clear, formal style that was very much driven by color, pattern, and sort of graphic geometric shapes, which is pretty evident in what we can see on the screen right now. But one of the things I found so interesting about your work, um, even though it was rooted in abstraction, is that you were dealing with very sort of personal, emotional subject matter, and not just emotional, but bodily too. So something that you've been exploring too is ideas of different physical systems within our body, and thinking about those as sort of symbolic for emotional experience. And I find it really interesting to look at this work, which is so graphic and so colorful and so rooted in pattern, and then knowing that sort of narrative that informs it provides this level to the work that is really powerful, and there is a visceral, I think, reaction that people have when they see the work. um, but it is that sort of thing that the sort of more we get to hear your perspective, the more access we have to that kind of experience with it. One other thing before I pass the table to you is something that's been really interesting to me since you've been in the studio is how that work, which was so clearly had your style and was defined by some of those formal elements I mentioned, has shifted dramatically in some ways. Like you've explored with photography, you've sort of to some degree allowed yourself to sort of remove the use of color as such a prominent feature in the work, or even that sort of control. I mean, I think there's been sort of this interesting
Mm.
play with sort of control and then sort of allowing yourself to lose control to a degree in the work. That's been really interesting. So that's a lot. Anything you that I got completely wrong?
No, I think you got it. Yeah, it's kind of funny because it's like I have like developed and found like this style, and it's like, okay, yeah, this is like very much what I'm doing. I've got it. Let's get rid of it and do something else.
Right.
Um, and I think like how that kind of played out was bringing in this focus of the body and fascia, um, which is like this thin tissue system that runs through our whole body. It's kind of having a moment. People are getting into it, learning more about it, and is a big part of like body work and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Looking at that and primarily grief and that relationship, but also just more broadly, like all of our lived experiences, especially the ones that are more traumatic, and how that is connected to our bodies. Focusing on that kind of, I think, like made me have to kind of like shift. What mediums am I using? How am I expressing this? And just that style that I developed like stopped being the like appropriate means to communicate that relationship, which I think I'm still exploring, but getting there.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that's, part of being an artist, right? You're always
Yeah.
sort of exploring and shifting, or being a human, really. Um, but I wonder, it's interesting to me the level of experimentation you have allowed yourself throughout this residency, because I think, you, every artist is different, and takes different approaches, and growth looks, you know, and experimentation looks different in everyone's studio and practice. But I'd say it's been really interesting to watch you really dove into that. I mean, there was a time when you were exploring with, what had been acrylic paintings with maybe some ink work or pen work on them. Um, you started bringing in different textile mediums, and like burning and reducing, and then plaster and photography, and you really expanded way outside of your wheelhouse. And I'm just curious to sort of know about that. Was there something about like the residency and being in this sort of community of artists, or were you just hungry? Have you always been that kind of fearless, had that sort of ability to explore? I'm just interested
Yeah,
to
I
know.
wish I have always been that fearless. I think the reality is like fear has directed most of my life. But
I relate to that.
yeah. Um, I think both though, and this is something that like I've been recognizing and thinking a lot about as I'm just like in this process and in the residency. And I think it's like a combination of a few things, which like up until the last year or two, I was, still working full time and doing art on the side. So there's a lot of like time constraints that impacted
Hmm.
my work. And then I kind of was able to like take the jump into doing art full time and then started doing this residency. And something about that definitely like just having this opportunity like pulled a wall down to be like, yeah, let's just do whatever I want.
Yeah.
And it like allowed me, um, or it like, yeah, created a space for me to give myself more permission and more freedom with my work. But have been like thinking back to, and I think I've kind of always been that way with like materials and mediums. And like when I was in undergrad, I was a painting major, but I like filled all my open class slots with like printmaking and ceramics
Mm-hmm.
and the like one-off, sculpture elective, or yeah, just like whatever I could get my hands into, I wanted to. And I've done that. I've continued doing that a little bit like since then, taking art classes at like community art centers and yeah, doing like collage classes and other ceramics stuff, and just like yeah, playing around with all these different tools.
And then, yet at the same time, you do. I mean, like we started out with, there is this return, even though you've played and experimented. Like there is, does always seem to sort of return back to, or this style that you've established, and this sort of um, very expansive palette, but this sort of palette of colors, and the use of pattern. And so I wonder, it's something that's interesting to me about artists is I see that play. There's this sort of like experimentation and expansiveness, but then there's also something really valuable about leaning into what you know and leaning into a comfort zone and like, you know, repeated mark making or, you know, the and so I'm just, do you have, I'm not articulating myself particularly well, but I feel like there's almost like two parts of this sort of creative experience that you're feeding in that. Or do you have thoughts on that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think yeah, I think I'm with you. Um I think part of it is just that like allowing myself to like be authentic in the process is something that just kind of inherently is going to create a through line in that work.
Mm-hmm.
As long as like I'm focusing on like making, you know, my work and not trying to like make something, um you know, I take inspiration from other artists for sure, but not just being like, oh, you know, this thing sold, so let me like keep doing that. Like being
Right.
authentic in my work making, I think just like naturally is gonna create a through line. But then there is a lot of intention with that too, just because of like what I'm interested in. And yeah, I think like one example, a good example is like, yeah, I've been really into patterns and shapes, and like the grid has been something that like has been a part of my work for a long time. And like one of those things where it's kind of like even longer than I like realized. Like I look back at old stuff and it's like, oh, that was a grid. um, and then I like get into this sculptural stuff that then took me into photography stuff. And like the primary material for that I've chosen is like a screen that is a grid.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, just still having that kind of same way of thinking and same interests, but it's like translating that with different approaches and materials.
Right. And I wonder, I there's two competing thoughts. Like, which direction am I going to go?
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
my brain always.
yeah. So it's sort of interesting because it's like this sort of like play between you know, comfort, what's comfortable and what's uncomfortable, and that, you know, that growth happens somewhere in this sort of space between those things, right? It's about like sort of like knowing yourself, like you're saying, and listening and trusting, but also allowing yourself to sort of encompass spaces that are uncomfortable. And by that I mean like maybe unfamiliar or
Right,
new, that then that allows you to grow in a way that you really can't control or anticipate, right? And
right.
yeah, it's something that yeah, I respect that in you. Like you're a young artist who's it's I think that can be a challenge for artists to allow that to happen, that to trust their own process enough to enter into a realm of what's the unknown or uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is. And that's like an ongoing, like daily practice. And I think like, yeah, the practice of being an artist like teaches me that and creates the space to, yeah, just like try new things and push myself in that way. But kind of outside of that, or like in my regular life or whatever, um I like try to have a like philosophy of, um like I can have kind of a dream or like a vision for something in the future. I can have a goal, and I can work towards that, but I can have absolutely like no control in how it goes or like what it ends up looking like. Um, and so yeah, having trying to have that balance of like working towards something, but also just like letting go and not holding on to it too tightly,
Right.
and just like trusting the process, which is, yeah, it's like a on, I can't just like say that now and I'll be like that every day for the rest of my life. It's like a ongoing practice.
Well, yeah, and I think like in some ways that's one of the, I mean, it's kind of like a lesson of humanity. I think the fact that grief is so much a part of the work, like I feel like that is part of the process of grief. At least
Yeah,
from my experience and talking to other people, like grieving helps you understand that that is the world. It is very much about relinquishing control, right? And
yeah. And grief is such a thing that like we want to control. We want it to be like very formulaic of like, I will, do this thing and then I will be done with my
right.
grief. And that's just not gonna work at all.
It don't work that way. Yep. Right. And it's yeah, I mean it's part of like just sort of maturing as a human is like that's a essential experience, human experience to go through that. And it's a rough one. but it's
Yeah.
but it's also yeah, it's interesting to hear how it sounds like it's sort of like it can be applied to your life in really productive ways, I think. Um,
Yeah.
having gone through that. Um, I want to shift the conversation. Oh, I want to go back before we get too far from what you were talking about, because I think this may segue into the mural work you've been doing, which is something I want to talk about. But I think, as you're talking about experimenting and your interest in the grid, and
Mm.
one of the things about this sort of transition in your work, or new area focus, or whatever you want to call it, has been the way that scale has you've played with scale in really interesting ways. So as people can see in the background, the your paintings and drawings tend to be on a relatively modest scale,
Mhm.
and then these photographs that you've produced are some are smaller, but some are really large. But really the idea with them is that you're using the photographic lens to sort of zoom in on something that starts out as a small scale, and in order to create that grid, and that's just I mean, I don't know. Scale is an interesting concept, so I'd love to hear a little bit about that. But also thinking about the idea of like you have been doing some public artworks, and in particular murals, and I think that too, like there is this sort of like interesting way in which like I don't know, scale is interesting to me, the way different artists play with it and explore. So, what are your thoughts on that?
The photographs, yeah, that I think was just a cool process that was just like a very organic process that I went through of like making this sculptural thing, and then like being compelled to take close-up photographs of it, um, and just blowing those up really large was just what felt right as like the right way to do that. It would be a very different thing for it to be tiny,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I think that too, kind of thinking about like in, I don't know, there's something about that process that made me think about, and this is kind of weird, but like when there's like cameras and body stuff, like
Ooh,
moving through, and it's like we get this totally different like scaled
right.
thing of like the inside of our bodies.
Well, and then it's also, I'm sorry, it's
No,
also
good.
then the sort of idea of like abstraction and distortion. Like it's almost like
Yeah.
when you go in at that scale, even though like mean, it couldn't be anything more like, it's giving you a really accurate picture, yet it presented is completely distorted and sort of abstracted from our understanding of ourselves, and like that's interesting
Yeah.
thought.
And that's kind of how, because I have like this impulse to still like think of these photos as like paintings,
Mm-hmm.
even though they're like obviously, but I think it's that that abstraction that and is done in camera. Like I'm not doing like edits to them in Photoshop or like anything, no edits to them after the fact. That that is like me as a painter doing photography.
Right. I think of them as paintings too. I mean, I think they are, because of like what you're saying, that abstraction that's happening and the scale and all of that. But something else that just occurred to me in sort of like looking at the works behind you and having those images of the photographs in my mind is that sort of bodily connection and scale, and how that sort of functions, because the photographic work, it feels very bodily in a real visceral way, like there's a fleshiness to them,
Mm-hmm.
um, that really resonates. Whereas the sort of body, the presence of the body in the actual painted works is, it's sort of more, in my mind, it feels like sort of, like some sort of like little microcosm, like like you've got like little,
Yeah,
you're
it's like
looking
the
under
like
a magnifying glass or something. Not a COVID brain is
yeah,
attacking me.
it's like the illustrations in your biology textbook
Yeah,
vibes. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. It's like this real micro level versus this kind of
Yeah.
monumental, fleshy environment. And I'm sort of curious, I guess, with the murals, because the murals that you've made, my understanding, it's more in this sort of microbiology, acrylic painted style. And so, like, thinking about that existing on a bigger scale where you're, as a viewer, your body is sort of interacting with it in a different way is,
Yeah.
I'm curious to know what happens there.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting because yeah, I think a lot of my paintings, especially where I would do so much repetition, part of why it's a smaller scale is because I'm like doing tiny little lines over and over again, or like dots over and over again. But then I can translate this to this like much larger scale on a wall mural. But it is like simplified in other ways. So like this mural that I did for a friend's outside a friend's coffee shop that's in Durham, I did kind of like larger blocks of color and then just larger scale grid
Hmm.
sections over it. So it is, yeah, very much the same style and a similar approach, just translated to mural. And I'm working on one right now that will have a lot of dots in it. And so I'm like curious, yeah, to see what the timeline with that will be. Because
Are
it
you
is
cursing your design choices?
not yet, not yet. We'll see when I get to that layer. I think it's gonna be worth it, however it goes. I think it's gonna look really cool. And it, tells the story that we want to tell. But it'll be a lot of dots.
Well, tell me, and yeah, I mean, it's just so cool to think about like your body, like, um, being in that environment of one of the painting and mural form sort of starts to function more as an environment and a place in which we can sort of exist.
Yeah.
versus sort of looking at something and understanding it as sort of exterior. It's
Right. Yeah. And like my body is a lot more involved in the process. It's a much more just like physical approach. And then like once it exists, the like viewer's body becomes a part of it in a way that is so different from
right,
a painting on the wall. Yeah.
right. Yeah, it's fun to experience, like just being able to have those different iterations of an artist's practice and experience it in those very different sort of physical forms is so
Yeah.
satisfying. So tell us before we run out of time, I want to hear like more specific. So this is your time to um, let us know how we can interact with you and your work. So like tell me where these murals are. Like are they in, you mentioned one's a coffee shop, so I'm assuming that's a place people can visit. So like how do people get to experience your work, Freddie?
Yeah. Um Yeah, for murals, this first one, it's a like coffee shop art space off Roxborough. It's
Okay.
called Perfect Lovers. So look that up on Instagram and you can find
Okay.
um their like hours and things that they have going on there. And it's outside in the way in like the alley that is their entrance. And then the one that I'm working on right now is inside Golden Belt in Durham and is with and for improv and comedy theater called Meddlesome. And yeah, they're a great group of funny folks, and they've been around for a while, but this space is new for them. So that well, the new physical space will be, it's in the works for opening soon, and this mural is a part of that process.
No pressure.
So yeah, you can go check out an improv show and my mural at the same time.
Cool.
Um, yeah, other than that, in the studio art space, of course, and there are a lot of open days in the afternoons and first Fridays and all of that. I'll be in a group show in Salisbury in September at a spot. It's called Waterworks.
Oh, that's fantastic, Freddie.
Yeah,
Waterworks is a great institution. That's awesome.
yeah. I'm excited. I haven't like physically been to that place, but I've been checking them out online, of course.
Mhm.
And that's kind of close to where I grew up, Concord. So that'll be cool to be showing back in that area. And
What's
that's
the show about? You said it's a group.
identity. It's
Okay.
called I Am. Um,
Cool.
so yeah, have a few paintings about grief and identity in that show. So I'm excited about that. And then yeah, there's more murals and shows in the works. So more to come down the road.
Excellent. And is the best way to follow you on Instagram or website or both?
Yeah, yeah, both. My website is freddiebellart.com. And yeah, the photos we've been talking about are on there, but
Okay.
the real experience is on the wall in the studio. And then my Instagram is Fartworks.
Best Instagram
Yeah,
handle
best
all
handle
time.
ever.
It truly is. Well, I mean, I guess the since we it's not gonna kick me off quite yet.
Yeah, we got
The one other thing is like, what do you see happening after the residency? Because you live in Hillsborough, right? Do you have sort of like plans? Do you have a home studio set up? It looks like maybe that's what's going on right now as your backdrop. I don't know.
yeah, this is was my home studio. I definitely through this residency have like realized that I really prefer having a space outside of the home that I can like go to. It's much easier to get like in the zone and in that flow state.
Mhm.
So I'll, put this out there, manifest that I'll get a studio at the Mill Studios
Oh,
in
cool.
Hillsboro, which is like another kind of similar warehouse turned studio and gallery spot out here in Hillsboro. So, hopefully things align for that to be an option. Yeah, otherwise I'm, fortunate to have enough space in my house to work, but yeah, let's manifest
Yeah,
new
okay.
physical
I'm
studio.
sending it out into the
That's the
universe.
dream that I can, work towards, but can't control.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean that's always I mean I think it's like what we were talking about with like comfort and discomfort. I think like there's points in an artist's life that having that home space is what's right, and then being
Yeah,
outside is what's right. So it's I think we're fortunate that there are. It feels like they're becoming more space has expanded to a degree for artists in the area, while at the same time the number of artists that are here is like
yeah,
exploding. So it can be challenging. So yeah, I will definitely help do my best to help manifest
yeah.
that for you. But we're really happy to have you here at Artspace, and I hope people will come and check out your space here and see the work in person. I'm looking forward to getting out to Durham and checking out the murals. Um, so, Freddie, it has been a pleasure. I thank
Oh, the pleasure is mine.
you. All right. Bye.
Bye.